The rancher had spent nearly a decade living alone in the unforgiving desert, his life a rhythm of solitude, survival, and silence. He had built his small wooden ranch at the edge of the cliffs, surrounded by a vast stretch of sand and rock that seemed to stretch endlessly to the horizon. For years he had seen nothing but the sun rising and setting over the dunes, the wind howling through the canyons, and the occasional coyote stalking in the distance. The townspeople called him the ghost of the desert, a man who had no family, no companions, and no desire for company. He had chosen this life deliberately, believing that people brought trouble, grief, and weakness, while the desert demanded strength, patience, and cunning. Each day followed the same quiet routine, checking his water lines, feeding the horses, repairing fences, and tending the small vegetable patch he had managed to coax from the harsh soil. Nights were colder than anything he had known, but they were his own, filled with stars that sparkled like scattered diamonds over the endless wilderness. But on one sweltering afternoon, his routine was broken. While riding across the ridge to inspect a broken water trough, he noticed something that did not belong. At first he thought it was a trick of the sun on the sand, a shimmering mirage. But as he drew closer, the figure became unmistakable. A girl suspended by her wrists from a wooden beam, tied cruelly between two jagged rocks. Her dress was torn, her skin burned from the relentless sun, and her breathing came in shallow, weak gasps. For a moment he froze, the sight shocking him to the core, though he had lived with hardship and seen human cruelty before. This deliberate act of leaving someone to die in the desert felt like a knife twisting in his chest. Without hesitation, he dismounted, the heat of the sand burning through his boots, and approached her carefully. He cut the ropes with his hunting knife, feeling her fragile body slump into his arms. She was so light, almost weightless, yet her presence carried a quiet desperation that seemed to fill the air. He lifted her onto his horse, holding her close as he rode back to the ranch, shielding her from the blinding wind and grit that stung his eyes. Along the way, she whispered her name, Evelyn, and told him of the Dalton brothers, a gang of ruthless outlaws who had attacked a stagecoach she was traveling in. She had resisted them, tried to fight back, and in response they had captured her and left her to die. The rancher listened quietly, every muscle in his body tense, his mind racing through possibilities. He had no intention of letting them succeed. By the time they reached his ranch, the sky had begun to bleed the colors of sunset into the desert. He placed her gently on his bed, soaked a rag in water from the well, and pressed it to her forehead, murmuring words of comfort even as the sweat ran down his face. Hours passed, and finally, her eyes fluttered open, blue as a winter sky, filled with fear and disbelief. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice fragile, almost fading into the still air. "No," he said simply. "We saved each other." In the following days, Evelyn began to regain strength. She helped with chores around the ranch, brushed the horses, repaired fences, and even managed to cook small meals, filling the empty rooms with laughter and warmth that had not been there for years. The rancher found himself listening eagerly to her stories, watching her smile, and feeling a strange lightness in his chest, a sensation he had long forgotten. For the first time in nearly 10 years, he realized that life could hold more than solitude. It could hold connection, hope, and even love. But peace in the desert was fleeting. One evening, as the sun sank behind the cliffs, he noticed smoke rising in the distance, thick and black against the fiery sky. The Dalton brothers had found them. His jaw tightened and he fetched his Winchester, loading it with practiced precision. Evelyn's eyes widened with fear as she realized what was coming. But he took her hand and held it firmly. "They'll come," he said calmly, "but they won't take you again." When the outlaws arrived, chaos erupted. Gunfire echoed through the canyons. Horses screamed and dust flew into the air in clouds. The rancher fired with deadly accuracy, each shot finding its mark, felling one outlaw after another. Only their leader remained, his face twisted in rage and cruelty. He raised his pistol toward Evelyn, confident in his intimidation, but the rancher's single shot rang out, ending the threat decisively. Silence fell over the desert once more, broken only by the wind moving across the dunes. Standing together at dawn, bruised and exhausted but alive, the rancher and Evelyn understood something profound. The desert, which had once been a prison of loneliness, had become a place of survival, redemption, and new beginnings. The walls around his heart, built over years of solitude, had crumbled. replaced with a promise of companionship, trust, and hope. As the sun rose over the horizon, spilling gold and fire across the sand, they faced the day together, knowing that whatever trials awaited, they would face them side by side. In that quiet, harsh land, two lives had collided and created something stronger than fear, something enduring, something alive. The rancher, once alone, now had purpose. Evelyn, once left to die, now had safety. And together, they began a journey neither of them had anticipated, yet both knew they were ready to meet hand in hand under the vast, wild skies of the West. Life at the ranch had begun to settle into a fragile rhythm. Evelyn had regained her strength, helping with chores and even laughing for the first time in months. The rancher, once a man of solitude, found himself looking forward to her presence, her stories, and the quiet moments they shared by the fire. But the desert never remained peaceful for long. One late afternoon, while checking the fences near the northern ridge, the rancher spotted distant figures moving swiftly across the horizon. Dust clouds trailed behind them, too organized, too purposeful to be wanderers or hunters. His heart sank. The Dalton brothers had returned, and this time they were not coming for a fight. They were coming for revenge. He rode back to the ranch as quickly as the horses could carry him, signaling Evelyn to stay inside and prepare for what was coming. Together they barricaded the doors, stacked supplies near the windows, and armed themselves as best as they could. The tension hung thick in the air, blending with the scent of hot sand and sweat. By nightfall, the outlaws had surrounded the ranch, their voices echoing like threats over the canyon walls. The rancher stood at the porch, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the shadows for any movement. Evelyn knelt behind a wooden crate, her fingers clutching a small revolver he had reluctantly given her. The first shot rang out and the battle began. Gunfire lit up the darkness, splintering the porch and sending sand flying. The rancher moved with the precision of a man who had survived the desert for years, each bullet finding its mark, each decision calculated to protect Evelyn and keep her alive. Hours stretched like eternity, the echo of shots blending with the howl of the wind. One by one, the outlaws fell, but their leader remained, taller, fiercer, his eyes burning with fury. He charged toward the porch, brandishing a pistol and screaming threats that carried across the night. The rancher's pulse raced, yet he remained steady. With a careful aim and a single, well-placed shot, he ended the threat. The silence that followed was almost deafening. The desert had claimed its quiet once more, but this time it felt different. Evelyn ran to the rancher, tears streaking the dirt on her face, and threw her arms around him. "We survived," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "Yes," he replied, his voice calm but full of emotion. "We survived together." The next morning, the desert seemed softer somehow. The sun rose in colors more brilliant than before, spilling gold across the sand and reflecting in their eyes. For the first time, the rancher allowed himself to imagine a future, not one of solitude, but of companionship, trust, and shared purpose. Evelyn, once a victim left to die, now stood by his side as an equal, her courage and spirit undeniable. Together they repaired the damage the outlaws had caused, tending to the ranch and each other, strengthening not just their home but the bond between them. The desert, harsh and unforgiving as it was, had shaped them both. It had tested them, threatened to tear them apart, and yet in its vast emptiness it had forged a partnership neither could have imagined. They learned that survival alone was not enough, that to truly live one must fight for connection, for love, and for hope. And so, under the endless sky and scorching sun, the rancher and Evelyn faced the horizon, ready to meet whatever challenges came next, knowing that together they could withstand even the wildest storms of the West.